Welcome back, everyone, to the Bitcoin Business Bureau. I'm your host, as always, LitecoinLeader. Today, we're going to be talking about inflation, which is going to be the top story for today, much like I hit on yesterday's top story of the executive order for crypto, and we'll touch on that briefly. But I want to touch on inflation and how the number is calculated and the CPI that came out and why that matters for crypto. All that's coming up next. Okay, so I've got three different stories that I'm going to share and touch on, but first I want to put them out there so you can see what I'm going to be talking about today. So the first thing is that I mentioned this yesterday, and I'm going to be putting up the video, and I was a little here in the corner, but I'm just going to post this up here that I did a video about this. This was the main story yesterday about the executive order that came out to talk about crypto oversight and what they're going to be touching on. I covered this pretty well, I think, yesterday, but that was the main story yesterday. But the main story today is this one. And this is what everybody's going to be talking about today, and that is inflation. The CPI index came out. It was 7.9. Oh, thank you. Don't need that. So 7.9 rate came out today. That was announced, the CPI index, and it was driven a lot by, they exclude food and energy. I love that they do that. Food and energy are not in there. But again, this is mindful. This is only up to the end of February. So it doesn't include things that have happened since March 1st. I'll get into that in a minute. But this was a lot about, they don't include food and energy, but they do include housing. And the way they do housing, they just call people up and say, what would you rent your house for? It's not like they're using Redfin or Zillow or anything like that. This is one of the numbers that's kind of squishy that they can play with to try to make this number be as low as possible. And they certainly would rather be at 7.9 rather than 8. And then lastly, this is a chart that most people have already seen. And I think that's a good chart. And I'll include all three of these as links in the description. But I wanted to just put this out there. I'm going to talk about inflation, deflation, and how the dollar has been losing its purchasing power since it was the dollar. I say the dollar, the currency dollar, the Federal Reserve note. If you look at the top of the bill, it says Federal Reserve note, because this isn't backed by anything since 1971. But here are the major events that have led from the dollar being able to buy $100 worth of value down into like $1 or $2 now. And this is just to 2019. I think you would need to zoom in the corner here to really see where we're at. But we're certainly far less than a couple, or like maybe at 2% at this point. So those are the three images I wanted to share today. Let me stop sharing my screen, and I'll start to unpack a lot of this as we go further. So now we've talked about three different things today. We've talked about the story from yesterday, the executive order, and how America's trying to get on top of cryptocurrency because they have to. So we nailed that story. We know that was going to be the top thing. Again, quite frankly, with that being a dominant story, much like inflation will be a dominant story today, it's pretty easy to slip other stories under the radar because they're going to go without attention. So that's good that we're not seeing bad news come out on different projects. It'll be a perfect opportunity just to say, hey, while everybody's looking over here, let's talk about something over here and see if we can slip it past people. Normally that's like a Friday night kind of news release, but we're midweek. Let's see how it goes. Okay. So I showed the graph of the loss of the value of the dollar. And I say dollar, I really don't like using the word dollar because it's not a dollar. It's a Federal Reserve note. And let's just start there. This is allegedly a US dollar. But if you zoom in, get really close. See those words right below my nose? Federal Reserve note. What that means is that this is no longer backed by anything but confidence in the government, and it's a note. A note is an IOU, or a debt instrument. This is an FRN, a Federal Reserve note. These dollars are losing value, as the graph shows, quickly. And this is where I want to introduce the Rule of 72. For those of you who don't know the Rule of 72, this is something that's used in the world of finance as a quick and dirty understanding of how soon things will double, either in a good way, like you get twice as much money value out of it, or will be cut in half. So The rule 72 just says that, let's just say you have something that you're going to make 6% on. Let's just say that you have an investment, you're going to make 6% a year on it, and you know that that's going to be your return. Let's just say it's a CD, a bond, a mortgage, whatever you have. It's just whatever you've invested in, you've got something that you know is going to be 6%, making it year over year. When will you double your money? The rule 72 says take your return number and divide it into the number 72, and that's the number of years approximately, or pretty darn close, of how long it will take for your money to double. So based on the rule of 72, something that is returning 6% a year, 6 into 72 is 12. It will take 12 years for your money to double. Now, if you find something that is going to make money at 12%, that number goes from 12 years down to 6, because 12 into 72 is 6. So that works for numbers basically between 2 and 3%, all the way up into like the low to mid-teens, like 14, 15%. And that's when it starts to get a little wonky after that. It doesn't work as well, but you can get a basic idea. 18%, 4 years, it's not the best calculation. And after that gets a little hard. But between 2 and 3% and 12 and 13%, the rule 72 works well. Why do I mention that? Well, we're going to talk about that, and that's how the Federal Reserve has orchestrated the loss of purchasing power. So the Federal Reserve sets a target each year of 2 or 3% for rate of return. And what happens, and the Federal Reserve started back in 1913. That's roughly 108 years ago. That's a good number to use because the math works out nicely. So we will start with 2%. So let's say the Federal Reserve did a fantastic job of doing what they were supposed to do, and that the average interest rate for Americans for the last 108 years was 2%. Well, 2%, 2 into 72 is 36 years. 36 into 108 years is 3. So that means your money has lost twice. It's gone down 3 times. It's gone down 50%. So what that means is that after 36 years, the purchasing power of this became this. After 36 more years, the purchasing power went from this. I'm somehow messing up my background. All right, it went from 36 down to this. So now I'm at 72 years in. So now I go 108 years, and now I'm down to this. So I lost. So this is 1/8 of the original values because it's threefold. There's a quarter, there's a half, there's full. Not a magic trick. It's still the same Federal Reserve note. So the power of this went from $1 worth of purchasing power down to 12.5 cents. So that's at 2%. Okay, and I keep looking up to the left. I'm sorry, I'm using 2 monitors. I got a whole system I'm working with here. Bear with me as I'm doing a whole bunch of editing. It's been a bandwidth fun day. Anyway, so that's 2%. 3%. 3% into 72, 18 years. Excuse me, I can do math better than that. 3 into 72 is 24 years. At 24 years, now you're looking at 24, it would be cut in half 4 times. That would be 96 years. But we are talking about 108. So now that's another 12 years. That's, call it half. So now you're looking at a factor. I'm going to call it, just for practicality reasons, let's just say it 5 times your money will be cut in half, because another double would have been 8. So this goes, instead of the 2%, that why is that doing in the background? All right. I think it's because of the green screen. I'm going to keep it in front of my shirt. So cut it this, then this, then this. That's 2%. And then you take a little bit more at 3%. You got to fold it again. It gets harder to fold. So now you've gone from 50 cents, $1 to 50 cents, 50 cents down to 25 cents, 25 cents down to 12.5 cents, 12.5 cents down to 6.25 cents. That's 4 times. And that is in 96 years. So at another one, you're down to 3.125 cents. You've lost 97% of your purchasing power. That assumes that it's been a constant 3% inflation rate for those 108-ish years. Now, finally, I will talk about 4% just to see the dramatic difference. 4%, you go 4%, 4 into 72 is 18 years. 18 times 6 is 108. So we've gone, 100 to 50, 50 to 25, 25 to 12 and a half, 12 and a half down to 6 and a quarter, 6 and a quarter to 3.125, and then one more. And you can check the math on me if you want in the comments, but I'm doing it off the top of my head. Now you're down to 1.5625, so you've lost 98.4-ish, 98.5% of your purchasing power. Kind of matches the graph that I showed earlier. So that's at 4%. What was the number today? 7.9 officially. Although we know that the official number, go to shadowstats.com, hasn't been updated yet, but they will be updating it. The number, as a rough rule of thumb, another rule of thumb, Shadow Stats will basically say that the number, whatever the CPI is announced at, it's double that. Now, why does the government want to give as low a CPI as possible? First off, it makes the Federal Reserve look good because their target is 2 to 3%, and even if it's 7.9, it's not super scary yet. When you get double digits, it becomes super scary. 7.9 gets to be scary because you're losing your money quickly, and at 7.9, let's just call it 8. That means like in 9 years, less than a decade, you're going to lose half of your purchasing power. Now, let's put these years in perspective. When I go back to the 2% number, 36%, that's 36 years. That's typically, it used to be the definition of a generation was 30 to 35 years. If you read a really good book called The Fourth Turning, they say every 20 years or so is a rough generation, and every 4 generations or 80 years, significant things happen. So if you go back to the days of the Civil War, which was in the 1860s, and that was the significant event, and that was the Fourth Turning. And you can go backwards and frontwards 80 years from there pretty easily. 1860, going back 80 years, 1780, that's basically the birth of our nation. Going forward 80 years from 1860 becomes 1940, World War II. Go forward another 40 years, 2020, welcome to today. So every 80 years or so, according to the Fourth Turning, it's a great book, The Fourth Turning. I think Strauss is one of the authors, but you can find it. A lot of people talk about that video. But that basically, it tells you that, it puts in perspective. That 2% I said earlier was 36 years. That's a lengthy generation. 3% is 24 years. 4% is 18 years. 18 years is significant because it's inside of a generation. So imagine that your children and then their children, 18 years. In 18 years, you're going to lose half your purchasing power. If you want to know why millennials are struggling to buy real estate and make ends meet, there you go. And that's at 4%. So that just gives you some perspective. 7.9%, that CPI number is scary. And that they wanted that number to be like 8, less than 8, because 8's even scarier than 7 and change. And 7.9 doesn't sound as scary as 8. Just like something that's for sale for $99 sounds a lot cheaper than $100. So that's something to get, to think about, and that's what. So the CPI is being manipulated, as opposed to what Shadow Stats reports, because they want to keep the CPI as low as possible, because the government has to pay Social Security, has to pay the military, has to pay returns on investments based on the inflation numbers. So they want to make the Fed look good. They want to make things look like they're under control when they're not. And they're trying to make things not sound as scary as they all are, as everybody is dealing with higher energy and food costs. So these are some of the things that we touched on in our AMA. I just want to point that out. We did an hour-long AMA, both myself and Patrick did last night. Divvy Daddy, as you also know him. I'll make another link up here in the corner so you can watch that. But I do 4 AMAs a month. I do one free one on YouTube. Did that last night. I do 2 for CryptoConfidential. You'll find that link below. And also there's one for my Patreons that I'll be doing. I'll squeeze that in for my trip to Oklahoma, which I mentioned also on the AMA. So another thing about the CPI before we wrap up for today. The numbers that were reported today only go until the end of February 28th. Significant events happen on March 1st. March 1st was the first day of spring, according to the Russian calendar. That's when we all know what happened in Ukraine and Russia, and the everything going completely nuts since then as far as pricing. Oil's, I don't even know what it is today, but it's probably like $130 a barrel. And 100 used to be a significant number, and now it's well over that. And we get all-time records in all these different commodities: gold, silver, palladium, oil, natural gas. All these things cost more, and everybody's going to have to be worrying about inflation. So I mentioned the Rule of 72. I mentioned what's going on with the CPI. But let's talk about that story from yesterday and kind of tie these things in. Like they had an announcement yesterday about talking about cryptocurrencies and how the U.S. is going to be, there's some urgency to investigate them. We all know that they've probably been working on a central bank digital currency, or CBDC, for a while now. And now is the right time for them to roll it out and just say, hey, we want you to say, here's this much better, more stable currency. They'll spin it however they want. But the only way you can get it is through an app which will have a social credit score and other rules that they have to follow so the government can be more involved in your well-being and your economy. You won't be given a choice, but you'll be given a financial incentive probably to join this, and that will lead to Universal Basic Income, or UBI. So I won't get too far down the rabbit hole of that, but if you ever, there's plenty on my Patreon to talk about that, and I have to be careful about what I say on this public forum, but UBI, social credit scores, those kinds of things, just look and see what they've been doing in other Asian countries with those types of things. Not great for the well-being of the populace. So bringing this full circle, why are we talking so much about inflation on a cryptocurrency channel? Great question. I know it's a crypto channel, but it's a Bitcoin business bureau, right? Business. This is all intermingled, all the economy. The economy, the inflation is going to lead people towards cryptocurrencies and learning more about it because it's so much in the news, as we just heard about from the story yesterday, but because they're also deflationary. Bitcoin is the only asset that we know exactly how much there will ever be. And we know the tokenomics of it. We know what the creation schedule, every 4 years they cut the supply in half, which is good because that halvening, or halving, however you want to say it, reduces the inflation rate, or how much they add each year. And it's going to be really, really minuscule after 2029, because at that point, I don't know what this is. It's well below 1%, I believe. So that's where we're all heading towards. To combat inflation, you need to find deflationary assets that will move upwards in value against all these other fiat currencies that are heading towards hyperinflation and probably to the end of their existence in their current forms. So this form here, which is all folded up. So what you used to be able to buy for this, now you're going to need at least this or more. So, and that's where we're at today. That's where we're at with inflation. But they can keep making more of those. They can keep printing more of those, or making more ones and zeros on an account. But they can't make more Bitcoin, because that's the only asset where we know exactly how much there's ever going to be, 21 million, and we know their schedule for them being created. So that's the difference. So if knowing the tokenomics, knowing deflationary assets, cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, like Litecoin, like Digibyte, that we know are fixed in supply and what their schedule of creation is going to be, or other currencies that we know what their creation rate is and their tokenomics are, such as Divi, we know what their schedule is to 2029, and other projects they all have in their white papers. The white paper tells you their tokenomics and how they're going to create the coins, and hopefully not create a ton of them. That was the original problem with Dogecoin, was that there was no upper bound. So having no upper bound or no real schedule can lead to a lot of like, well, this is just crazy. But one of the things that makes Bitcoin attractive is that there's only so much of it, so you better get some before it gets too costly. So that's where we're at. I think I've covered most everything I want to talk about today. I do recommend that book on the fourth turning. Recommend that you go check out yesterday's video and also the AMA from last night. But what are your thoughts? What are you thinking about inflation? What do you think is next? Where is this number going to be in March? I know it's going to be over 8%, probably, but I expect double digit by the summer. And who knows beyond that? But it's hard to predict the news on a week by week, almost a day by day basis. But we do know the general trend is that this is losing its purchasing power, whereas Bitcoin is gaining it. So, lots said today. I'm going to close the drawer on the bureau, say follow leader one last time, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.